Your research into near-death experiences is pretty interesting. So, before we begin, what is a near-death experience, and what is just near death?
Okay, those are both really interesting questions. In 1975, a writer, researcher, philosopher, medical doctor by the name of Raymond Moody wrote a book, um, published a book called Life After Life. And he was the person who coined the term near-death experience.
Mhm.
And what he was proposing in this book, cautiously, but by implication at least, was that at or near the point of death, people have a kind of structured experience. It's not a dream because lots of people have the same or similar experiences characterized by certain set motifs. For example, they couldn't put it into words. They found themselves floating above their body. They went down some kind of passageway of darkness. They saw a light. They encountered religious figures and or deceased relatives. They reached a kind of barrier or border. They had some kind of life review in which they saw all the events of their lives, big and small. And then they went back, as it were, into their bodies again and were resuscitated. That's the kind of thing that he talked about and he labeled a near-death experience. And other people, other researchers, such as Kenneth Ring, replicated his research later and just kind of reformulated this sort of model a bit. But that came to be the definition, excuse me, of near-death experience.
Mm. Right.
The kind of template, if you will, for subsequent research. So that is kind of, in a very broad sense, a working definition of near-death experience. Near death is probably, as the term most obviously implies, is when a person experiences some kind of life crisis, physical crisis, in which there are no measurable signs of life. So, for example, they are clinically dead. There's no heartbeat that can be measured using standard monitoring equipment. But it's not like they were dead for a long time, where they experience things like rigor mortis or decomposition. So if you think of Lazarus in the Bible, who Jesus raises from the dead. Now, Lazarus, according to John's Gospel, was dead for 4 days. Um, that's
Mhm.
dead, you know. Um, but these people who talk about these experiences they had near death were not dead in that sense. It's 4 minutes for them,
Mhm.
perhaps, rather than 4 days. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about when we talk about near-death experiences and near death.
Mm. So, when it comes to near-death experiences, it's possible to experience like a near-death experience without reaching clinical death. Just sort of almost reaching that point of your heart stopping. Say that you hit your head and you faint. Is it possible to get like a near-death experience in that case, or
What a
what?
really interesting question. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Because, and this is a little known fact, but you can have a kind of experience like the one that Raymond Moody defined in his book of the tunnel and the light and that kind of thing without being near death at all. So,
Mhm.
for example, let me give you a good example. In 2007, which is actually a tragic example, in 2007, a little girl was on holiday with her parents in Portugal named Madeleine McCann, and she disappeared, and she's never been seen since. And 4 days after the disappearance, her father was praying in a little chapel in the same resort that the girl went missing from. And during his prayer in the chapel, he had an experience with several characteristic features of a near-death experience. Now, sure, he was in a life crisis. I mean, his daughter had disappeared, a little girl, tragic, but he wasn't physically near death at all. That there was no physical crisis. He hadn't had a heart attack or anything like that. But he still had the kind of experience that is frequently labeled as a near death experience, even though he was nowhere near death. So you don't have to be near death to have a so-called near death experience, which to me is one of the most interesting features of the thing.
Yeah, and one of the things that makes me wonder is what is consciousness? Because what we often hear about is, say, someone that get into a car accident and it's
Yeah.
pretty serious, and they experience this phenomena that they see themselves in the car accident and they see themselves being rescued by the first responders, and they know exactly what's going on with the first responders, everything that is being said, and they're seeing themselves as a third person. Now, like, what do you even make of that?
It's really strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if a person claims to be above their body, looking down at it, to use the example you gave, person's been in a car accident, and then the next thing they are aware of is they're hovering 10, 12 feet above the car, and they see the rescuers, the first responders, come to the scene, and they see their own body being dragged out of the car and the resuscitation starting. The standard scenario for a near death experience. Now, let's just pause to consider that. What are they seeing with? If they're looking down, what is the organ of sight involved if the body is 12 feet below? They're not seeing with their physical eyes. They can't be, because A, their physical eyes aren't up there, and B, their eyes are almost certainly closed anyway. So straight away, we have a real conundrum. What are they seeing with? How are they seeing? They're conscious, you're right. Consciousness involves all kinds of sensory input,
Mhm.
including visual. But for that input, we usually require some kind of biological organ of sight. They can't be using that. So, how are they seeing what's going on?
Could it be the same way that you are able to dream and have these visuals, and sometimes even have these visuals be very realistic? Because it almost seems
I
that
think
is as that might be the case.
that's good. I mean, I think we're on the right lines there, aren't we? Because clearly, when you're dreaming, you're having often very rich visual experiences, very, very vivid, but you're not using your eyes. But it's still going on. So I think we're on the right lines there. It is possible to have supposedly visual experiences where the eyes aren't being used at all. So now this shifts our discussion of near-death experiences
Mhm.
into that kind of territory, doesn't it?
Mhm.
They seem to be a bit like dream experiences, but when people have these experiences over and over again, they're saying not only was it realer than a dream, it was realer than a normal waking experience. In
Right.
other words, as one person put it was realer than real.
Mhm.
So this is a very, very interesting area now that we've moved into, I think.
Yeah, because now, like, what is consciousness? And I'm sure that there are several senses that make up consciousness, like taste, smell, touch. And we take all of that information to basically draw out visuals. And maybe when you're experiencing like a out of body experience, and that's another thing that I want to ask, like if an out of body experience and a near death experience are like one of the same, because I know that with one with near death experiences you also include the thoughts of your own memory of like when you're born all the way to like your current age, and all of that flashes uh before your eyes. So like what is that, and like what is consciousness, and if like some of that those previous experiences basically help you create visuals to be very specific to the current situation of the car crash. So you are able to see what's going on just by using all of that information that you do have to make up these visuals. But I guess what I wonder is how are those visuals created to be exact to what is happening? Because from previous stories that I've heard, is that they get it to the T of like what is going on.
That's another really good, interesting area to move into. Um, in my book on near-death experiences, I discuss this at some length. And another little known fact about near-death experiences is that when these people are making these observations, they get stuff spectacularly right. You're correct, but they also get stuff wrong.
Hmm.
For example, they're seeing things in an operating theatre that just weren't there. So this is curious. We have this curious paradox. They're getting stuff spectacularly right, but they're also getting stuff spectacularly wrong. Now, let me just throw something else into the mix as well. On numerous occasions, people have located hidden objects in operating theatres, invisible from ground level, only visible if you were floating around near the ceiling. And what they want to do is collect data from resuscitated patients, and they obviously want to find out while you were out of your body, did you happen to see what the symbol was that I hid? Or did you happen to see the 5-digit number that I hid? You see, you'd get veridical demonstration, you'd get proof. If somebody says, yeah, I saw the number sequence while I was above my body and it's blah, 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 and that turns out to be correct, you've nailed it. You've proved it.
Hmm.
They were apart from their bodies. But guess what? No single experiment of that kind has ever registered a result in which any person correctly identified something that had been hidden.
So it
So let's
basically,
put those two,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, you put those two things together. The people are getting stuff
Mhm.
spectacularly right, but they're getting stuff wrong. But when objects are hidden, they never see them.
Mm. So could it also be that when you're going through this near death experience, say let's go back to the car crash, uh th- that you take the auditory senses and smells and y- touch, if you have any touch, hearing, all of that to make up the visuals. Because if something happens, say some one of the doctors hides something or does something without causing much noise, or say they might scratch their beard, so you might pick up on the sound of them scratching their beard, something like that. But if they simply just hide something without causing much noise, it doesn't cause a smell, you don't feel anything, so they don't pick up on that. But something that may cause a sound, they pick up on those auditory levels to make us to make sense of what is happening. Could that possibly be what's going on?
It could well possibly be what's going on. But that would fail to explain the things that they get, which are spectacularly correct. Let me do one example, and I'm going to have to use the camera to do that.
Mhm.
On one particular occasion, there was a surgeon, and this surgeon um, had a very curious way of gesturing to the other medical personnel in the operating theatre. He wouldn't point with his hands. It seems that he didn't want to do that because he kind of wanted to keep his hands kind of sterile in some way. I don't fully
Mhm.
understand. But what he was doing, instead of pointing with his hands, he would point like with his elbows, like
Mm.
this. And the person who had the near-death experience kind of later said it was like he was flapping his arms. Now, when you think about it, that kind of might be something that you would describe in a
Yeah.
loose sense as flapping the arms. Now, if that person wasn't having some kind of genuine perception, how does he get that so spectacularly right? Do you see what I mean? And
Yeah.
when you do that, you're not making a noise, so it's not auditory. He's not touching him, so it's not tactile. The only way he's going to get that right is if somehow he has seen it.
Right.
So just see again, we return to this curious combination of things that they get right and things that they get wrong.
Mhm.
Can I suggest two things that follow from there?
Yeah.
I don't want to do all the talking, but um, the, the first thing to notice is if you go to see a medium
Mhm.
and she doesn't know you, she doesn't know anything about you, she doesn't even know your name, and the medium starts to give you information, and 9 out of 10 things she's getting either wrong or she's getting stuff that could reasonably arrive at by guesswork.
Mhm.
And then the 10th thing, absolutely spot on. She's got it right. And there's no way she could have known, but she did. Do you see the parallel with near death
Mhm.
experiences? Hits and misses. She's getting stuff wrong, but she's also getting stuff spectacularly right. So I'm kind of interested in that parallel, you see,
Mhm.
that mixture of things that are right and wrong. Now, let's get a little bit weird here.
Mhm.
Once upon a time, there was a series called The X-Files. I don't know whether you remember that. Probably too
Right.
young, but you've heard of it, yeah?
Oh yeah.
And so in one episode, there were these three characters, and they called them the Lone Gunmen, and they were kind of conspiracy theorist kind of wackos, yeah?
Mhm.
And the central characters were Fox, Mulder, and Dana Scully. And on one particular occasion, one of these lone gunmen said, "This is what we like about you, Mulder. Your ideas are weirder than ours." And the older I get, I kind of find myself having weirder ideas, even than Mulder. So, what does that make me? Because
Mhm.
I'm now just beginning to wonder, could it be that when these people are in this state of very near death,
Mhm.
something is feeding them information directly into their consciousness, which is the curious mix of stuff that's spectacularly right and stuff that's wrong.
Mhm.
Perhaps the same kind of entity that is feeding stuff to the medium, which is also spectacularly right, but also wrong.
Wow. Okay. So,
You don't read that in the literature, but
oh yeah.
the older I get and the more I think about it, I kind of think, well, what else would explain this?
Mhm. Yeah. So now, I guess I want to ask you about mediums themselves. Like, how true are they? Because they also have there's also this thing about regressions that by a medium they are able to tap into like past lives. So, I mean, talking about consciousness, like does consciousness pass on through life after life? Like what is your opinion on that and like reincarnation?
Um, the same. That when people are regressed, for example, a hypnotist will do something like hypnotic regression, and they
Mhm.
will regress a person, say the person's 40 years old, they regress them back to when they were 21, and then when they were 10, and then their fifth birthday, and then they go, right, go back to before you were born. And they're suddenly giving this incredibly detailed narrative about a whole alleged past life. Now, when experts look at the transcripts of these hypnosis sessions, the experts are flabbergasted because a lot of the information they give is absolutely right. But guess what? They're also making mistakes. For example, they will give a name that they had in a past life, but the person never checks out. The name that is given is of a person that never existed. So when they're giving detailed things like that, there's no proof that this person really ever was that person in a past life. And yet they are getting stuff that is incredibly, spectacularly, historically correct. So we're stuck with that same paradox.
Mhm.
That's why I think of reincarnation. Uh, Again, interesting, compelling, unproven.
Right. Is it like one of those things that when you dream and you see faces in your dreams, the mind doesn't actually make or create faces, but those faces relate to someone that you may have seen out in public. Could it be the same thing with regression that the information that you basically repeat is information that you may have came across, and it's not like your main consciousness knows everything that you've experienced, but your subconscious might uh, have certain details that you might repeat during a regression.
I think that's absolutely true. And of course, it's the same with dreams as well. I mean, very often the things we dream are things that we experienced the previous day, albeit mangled. And I think in
Mhm.
the same way, when people are producing this material during these regressions, very often it's stuff, for example, that they've read a long time ago and they thought they'd forgotten, but then they bring it up during the hypnotic session. So I think there's something of that involved as well. So we're dealing with something that's really quite complex,
Yeah.
uh, that could have a variety of different explanations.
Yeah, because let's use the Titanic as an example, and having a regression and repeating that you experienced being on the Titanic. Now, you could give really detailed information, but that may be because you're a fan of the Titanic and you read on the Titanic, right? It would be different from someone that did not know about a certain event at all and repeating details about that event itself.
Yeah, I think the challenge is to find a case where the person genuinely had no knowledge at all, ever, of, for example, the historical period that they're talking about.
Hmm.
Uh, if you could be absolutely 100% sure that a person is talking in great detail about living in 18th century Italy,
Hmm.
but they'd never read anything about what life was like in 18th century Italy, then I think you might be onto something.
Hmm.
Again, the challenge is to be absolutely sure about that.
Yeah. And for them to actually be sure about that, because you may have read about something and totally forgot. It could have been fifth grade or, something like in a grade school that you read about
Exactly.
something like a day that you spent reading on a topic, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. And then we seem to remember everything. It's just that we can't recall it. And then when they're under hypnosis, maybe suddenly they're able to recall in some sense stuff that they hadn't been able to recall in any other way.
Right, because we know that this is used to treat trauma, right? To treat things and experiences that your subconscious or your conscious just forgot about, but they still
Yeah,
impact you.
yeah, yeah. I believe that hypnosis is used in a variety of therapeutic contexts, but interestingly, it's not used by the police. For
Mm,
example, you're a witness and you've witnessed a serious crime. You go and make a statement to the police about what you saw. Nobody's ever going to hypnotize you and regress you. But if it was a way of capturing accurate memories, they'd be falling over themselves to do it, and they do it all the time. So the
mhm.
fact that regression is never used within that kind of context would suggest that there is kind of a broad, widespread knowledge that this is an unreliable way of
Mhm.
recovering accurate past memories.
Right, yeah, it's unreliable, but it definitely is able to regress certain memories that you totally forgot about.
Um, Perhaps, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So now with like reincarnation and near death experience or near death experiences, is there like any similarities in that near death experiences could prove that reincarnation is possible?
It depends how you would want to go about it. I mean, I suppose you could say, I mean, I wouldn't say this,
Hmm.
but hypothetically, you could say, person apart from their body, looking down, proves that consciousness can exist independently of the body. If consciousness can exist independently of the body, then that consciousness can move on, as it were, be reborn into another body,
Hmm.
and experience stuff again. Yeah, I mean, you could argue that, and people do argue that. It wouldn't be something that I would necessarily want to agree with at all. But that's the way, if you really wanted to pursue that avenue, I think
Yeah.
that's the way you do it. You see, once you've proved, or you think you've proved the existence of the soul, then there's no
Mhm.
stopping you. You can say,
Yeah.
well, that soul can reincarnate over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Um, so that's probably how that argument would go.
Yeah. What's really interesting is kids that are regressed, and that has happened. Kids are regressed and they're able to give detailed information about past life, things that they may have not known. But there are also instances that they may have heard or came across a story, and they start making details. And I think that may be the where giving details that are not necessarily accurate come into place, because the mind has this way of like spitting out information just to make up for certain holes in stories.
I've read this as well. Yeah, I think it was Ian Stevenson who became the researcher best known for interviewing children and looking at the memories that children claim to have of past lives. And I think there are quite a number of books about this by other authors as well. Again, yeah, interesting.
Mhm.
As Mark Twain used to say, interesting if true, and interesting anyway.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
yeah, it's really interesting because there's a lot of research that I feel like still hasn't been done in this area. And like, how did you even get into near death experiences? Is that from like a personal experience that you had, or just a topic that you found interesting to study?
when I when I was a kid, um, my dad used to buy a newspaper on the way to work, and he'd bring it home for me to read at the end of the day. So I'd get in from school, and then he'd get in from work, and he passed me the newspaper. And on one particular occasion, uh, it must have been just after Raymond Moody's book came out in 1975. So we're talking, say, 1975. And on one occasion, there was just an article in this newspaper about near-death experiences. And I was very, very interested because that's around about the time that you begin as a young person to realize that, hey, I'm going to die.
Hmm.
People die, and I'm no exception. I'm going to die as well. So I was completely captivated by what I read. And then later on, you might remember Reader's Digest. In the back of the Reader's Digest, they would um, paraphrase, summarize a book. And I had the Reader's Digest, which summarized Moody's book, Life After Life. And then I actually gravitated to buying the book. And honestly, it was just as trivial as that. It was something that I first read in a newspaper that my father brought back from work that I read after I came back from school. And it all
Uh,
snowballed from there. Um, and I think a lot of people probably come to these subjects in such casual ways as well. I've never
mhm.
had a near-death experience. I've talked to very, very many people who have had near-death experiences, but I've never had an experience like that myself.
Oh, wow. So, do you find similarities between the near death experiences themselves, like something that's very particular to near death experiences?
Do you mean, is there anything that happens within near-death experiences that doesn't happen in any other kind of experience?
Yeah, something that's like very unique to near death experiences.
You know what? I don't think there is. I just don't. Even I mean, the most vivid aspect of a near-death experience, seeing the light,
Hmm.
so-called, at the end of the tunnel. My second book was called Lightforms, and it's all about people seeing unusual lights.
Hmm.
Sometimes these lights, just like the end of the tunnel in a near-death experience, fill them with positive feelings. They feel love coming from the light. But again, you don't need to be near death to see a light. You
Hmm.
don't need to be near death to have an out-of-body experience. You don't need to be near death to have an encounter with the deceased relative, and so on and so forth. So I see nothing unique about near-death experiences. What has actually happened
Hmm.
is that researchers have tended to group these disparate elements, such as out-of-body experience, tunnel, light, together, and label them as a near-death experience.
Hmm.
But when you read more widely in the literature, you see that all these features occur in testimonies to unusual experiences, admittedly, but where the experience was not near death at all.
So, what is the light about, really?
Well, that's a very good question. Because people interpret the light in their own experiences in different ways. Some people, for example, during so-called near-death experiences, interpret the light as an angel. Some people interpret the light as, if they're a Christian, Jesus. If they're an atheist, they might just talk about a being of light. A Buddhist might talk about the light being shunyata. So as to what the actual nature of the light really is, we don't seem to have any way of knowing. I mean, some Christians would actually say that the light is actually a demonic entity that's masquerading as something good. Because in one of his letters, the Apostle Paul in the Bible talks about Satan masquerading or appearing as an angel of light, and they take their cue from there. So look at that. You've got quite a spread there. Angel, being, Jesus, shunyata, devil.
Right.
It very much depends on the person doing the interpreting.
Because what I have heard about is that this light, it makes you feel good and makes you feel at peace.
Yeah, I read that too, and I think that broadly speaking, that is true. I think that when I wrote my book, Lightforms, it seemed very clear to me that there was a pattern, that a person would be in a deep crisis. Because I looked at hundreds of accounts for this book, which I obtained from the archives of the Religious Experience Research Centre at the
Mhm.
University of Wales in Lampeter in Wales. And there was a pattern that people would be in a state of deep crisis, uh, not just, oh, I've lost my car keys, but they might have lost a relative or had some other shattering blow in their life. And they reach a point where they just think, I can't go on. And at that point, the light would appear.
Mm.
And that would represent a turning point in their experience. And it was as if the light stopped them from being in such a state of deep crisis and set them on a new path where they could continue with their lives, find meaning, find purpose. So in that sense, yeah, that the light served a very benign function. It was a very good thing. You could almost see it as some kind of heavenly um,
Mhm.
interruption of their life in order to pull them out of a crisis and set them on a new path. So I agree. I think the light can and often is um, can be a very positive thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but could it also be death itself? And is it possible to have that experience when you are reaching death, and once you cross into the light, that's um, where the biological death happens?
Could be. Could be. I mean, obviously, by definition, nobody has come back from that state to tell us. But that would be a valid conclusion you could draw, but we would have no evidence for that.
Yeah, and it's hard to really get evidence from someone that has like factually died, because we know what happens when someone is dying and they get a lot of activity in their brain. So we know that that may be due to the near death experience. So someone that is actually dying might experience the near death experience. Like if you're coming to the end of your life and you're laying in a hospital bed, and you might experience that near death experience, like once your body starts to shut down and you die, and you might see the light, you reach the light, and that is what death is.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. Um, when we think of a journey, we can think in terms of departing from somewhere or arriving at somewhere. And when you look at near-death experiences, you could ask the question, this experience, is it an experience of departure or is it an experience of arrival? Now, often in the literature, the conclusion is drawn that this is an arrival of sorts, or at least a
Mm,
departure and an arrival. These people are leaving this life and arriving at the next one. But you could see it just purely in terms of departure, that these
mm,
people were leaving. Their experiences of leaving were in some respects similar, as all departures are, in a sense,
mm.
similar. But not one of them had actually arrived at their ultimate destination. And again, I kind of think that there is some validity in exploring that avenue. We're not talking in
Yeah.
terms of arrivals, we're talking more in terms of departures.
Mm. And then it makes me wonder, like, what are ghosts as well? Like, are ghosts just people that died that didn't reach the light and they're stuck on Earth?
Yeah, again, I mean, that's one interpretation people put on it. Ghosts is a whole new area, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Massive, massive. I mean, the literature on ghosts is huge, and there are so many different interpretations. And I guess if you want to see them as earthbound spirits that didn't quite make it to the light,
Mhm.
then that's just one of hundreds of ways of interpreting those kinds of narratives.
Because it also leaves the question of what is consciousness? If someone without a biological body is able to process um like certain attributes of what consciousness is, say you're being able to speak with a ghost through and is it like an EMF receiver or like an EMF recorder? If you're able to like speak with the ghost and they are able to talk to you and you're able to record certain things, like what is consciousness? Like what is happening there? Like what is a thought process behind that? And if
Yeah, I mean,
it,
this, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're making a really good point again. What is consciousness? It's a huge mystery. And the fact is that there are many, many different ways of answering that question.
Mhm,
And I think that question does go to the heart of so many of these things. But even ordinary states, like we're having this discussion now, we're both conscious. We don't know what the hell consciousness is.
mhm,
Uh, but but whatever it is, it's permitting us to have this interaction and every other interaction. So there
mhm.
is a great mystery at the heart of what it is to be human. And
Mm.
sometimes I don't even think we're asking the right questions.
Oh
But
yeah.
I think they're good questions to ask nonetheless.
I mean, have you been able to answer a question that you had when you started the study of like NDEs?
Lots, I think, because when I started to study them, I didn't have the same view of them as I do now. For
Mm,
example, to go back to the point I made earlier
mhm,
about people getting stuff right and wrong when they're making observations allegedly out of their bodies, I didn't know that. I
mhm,
was just captivated by the fact that they were getting stuff right. But as I did more and more research, I began to realize that there was more to it than that. And then
mhm,
the notion that in some strange way, like someone hacks into a computer, yeah,
mm,
to install information. Um, were these people who were in these states near death somehow more vulnerable to being hacked?
mm,
Was some, for want of a better word, entity hacking the consciousness of these people in these vulnerable states in order to insert information that was both true and false. Now, again, that was something that I would never have thought of when I started off. Um, but a bit like a weird Mulder out of the
mhm.
X-Files, I've kind of come to at least consider that possibility as I've continued to research these experiences.
Because that's basically what hypnosis is, right? That's hacking of the brain.
That's a really good analogy. It is, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Or at least hypnosis is putting the brain into a state where it's more vulnerable to hacking. So,
Mm,
in one sense, the hypnotist could be said to be hacking the mind, whatever a mind is,
mhm,
of the hypnotized subject. But on another level, you can see that maybe the hypnotist isn't exactly doing that, but what the hypnotist is doing is facilitating that.
mhm,
And these are the kinds of questions I think that need to be explored and discussed more. They're not really,
mhm.
but I think there's probably some mileage in examining these things.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, Yeah, this is I mean, it's been a great conversation to have with you because I'm really fascinated about hypnosis and or not just hypnosis. I should rephrase that. I'm very interested in just NDEs, the near death experiences, and everything that comes along with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating area. It's something that doesn't interest me as much as it did, but I obviously keep in touch with the research that's being done. And I think that looking at these experiences has been a way in for me to consider other things, such as what is the nature of consciousness, or what is a mind, or how do these testimonies that people have when they're telling you a near-death experience, how has that testimony become constructed?
Mhm.
Because testimonies are not windows into experiences. Testimonies are constructs. That person might have come up with that story through a whole process of composition, talking to other people,
Mhm.
reading literature, subsequently interpreting the experience, adding plot to what was actually something that was quite chaotic and plotless at the time. So the whole notion of how a testimony to something like a near-death experience um, comes to have its final form is also something that's extremely interesting.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
testimonies are not windows into experience. Testimonies are what research needs to explain. They're more complex than that.
Yeah, and I just wonder what is going to come next from NDs because it seems like a lot of research has been uncovered uh, to let us understand what like the near death experiences are, what consciousness is. Um, I mean, like hypnosis, even like what everything is, because now it's not just like a myth of what is happening or just a theory, like just stories, but there's now actual evidence of the science behind what is happening, right?
Scientists are interested in what's happening. I mean, you tend to find that I think it's probably true to say that the majority of scientists, if they were pressed, they would say near-death experiences are just brain processes.
Mm,
They're just unusual processes in a dying brain.
yeah.
Very occasionally, you will get, what should we say, a more maverick scientist, a bolder scientist even, who will say no, something more is required. It's not just brain processes. So I don't think there's a kind of scientific consensus, but I think there's probably a scientific majority which would say it's all simply brain based. I
Mhm.
wouldn't number myself amongst those skeptics. I think that the truth is probably much more interesting than that.
Oh yeah.
Um, Although I do acknowledge that within parapsychology, generally, the skeptics are usually right.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been very fascinated by this conversation, and as again, like the research that will come uh, because of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that people are bold in the future to Philip K. Dick, the science fiction writer. I think it was him. He said normal fiction goes, what if?
Mhm.
Science fiction goes, my God, what if? And I
Right.
think it's those, my God, what if questions
Mhm.
that are likely to be the most useful in producing illuminating answers in the future.
Yeah. All right. Well, you know, I um, I really enjoyed this conversation, and
Me too.
very interesting.
Yep.
All right. Well,
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
yeah. Thank you for giving me your time.
Yeah, no problem at all. And if people would like to visit my website, markfox.co.uk, there's plenty of food for thought there. And of course, you can access my books for sale as well.
All right, and I'll go ahead and put your link in the description.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, brilliant.